It is my pleasure to be back. I consider many of you in this audience to be my friends, and what a better place to have a venue than here. It's just really amazing. So today, my challenge that BI gave me was to bring some application to what we've been talking about. And yes, we've got an enemy that we're dealing with, but I think you've been given a lot of tools so far on how to do this. So how does it really apply when it comes to practice? And so you're going to get this practitioner opinion, practitioner evidence here all the way through. We're going to pull in some of the global aspects, but I'm really going to focus on the GDU, the developing guilt, and the multiple changes that have occurred over the last 20 years. Before we get into that, we got a slide on review, and then I got some on science. You know, I've got to bring that into this play. All of you know these parts, but it's the very last point that most of my talk is going to be dealing with, this persistence. We've heard all day long how we can identify a viremic animal. But what happens with the virus, and how does that influence our sow herd, especially in the lactation phase, if that animal is still non-viremic, but still has virus, so in the tonsils or wherever it may harbor. So we're going to deal with that, but here's the slides on the science. And I think these are important to try to understand because it's the limitations. It's where your questions are coming from. That last question was excellent. And Reed gave you the best answer with the science to back that up. But here's some of the limitations. So the classification systems on PRRS that we have today do not predict immunity and other things that's going to go on. So we cannot, if we isolate that virus, that isolate that's causing you clinical problems, we put it in a dendrogram and we say, oh yes, it's a new entry into your flow, or no, it's a resident virus, it still doesn't tell us exactly if there's going to be cross-protection or heterologous protection. That comes into the application of the tool and the responses that we get back. Here's another point that I'd really like to make and drill down into. We got a very diverse virus, the diversity on type 1s, the diversity on type 2s. I'll get into a little bit of what's going on in China. But again, this evolutionary trends that we're experiencing still doesn't predict what kind of response we're going to get from the vaccine to that particular virus. So those are two very important parts that I have to deal with as a practitioner. You guys have to deal with as well in challenging this virus. And again, we're only dealing with a very small, when we isolate, we do a cut pattern, let's say, we're dealing with a very small portion of that virus. So that's part of our limitations. Now, on the global side of things, what's happened in China, and I'll get into ASF with one slide a little bit later, but this type 2 has continued to evolve, as Reed just said, since 1996. We're getting new ones. Well, they had one in what's called high path PRRS, broke in 2006, and they called it the devil virus because it was so much different than what they had been dealing with up to that point. And vast majority of pigs died. It was very severe. Then around 2014, another virus entered, and they call it NADC 30-like because it sequences out very similar to what we have in America called NADC 30. As you can see, in 2008, we first found it. 2012, it was classified and described. This virus does cause clinical signs, is associated with the clinical breaks, and in my experience, it's a little harder to get under control with vaccine and management technologies. And that was Professor Yang's keynote talk last June at IPVS. So as a practitioner, every time a client has a PRRS break, and it's a new virus, I consider that being a unique situation. And I cannot predict how, if it's going to meet, if I can do the standard things, and we've talked about, all the speakers have talked about some of the standard protocols that we know work, if I have to vary those protocols in any way. So that's kind of how I approach a PRRS break and think of it as something unique. I do the standard techniques, and then we try to follow that and monitor that program to see if we have to modify it or not. This is the reason why. Because the antigenic variation of these isolates that are occurring do not necessarily, are not mitigated by the immunity that we're producing. So there's the variation. If I'm asked by some of my clients sometimes to give them one word on PRRS, it's variation. And that's kind of the theme that you've been hearing about. But we can fit some of these variations. We can reduce some of this variation if we do the management and the vaccination correctly. We've been through this transmission issue lots and lots of times. Several speakers have commented on it. We in America were not ready for PED virus, but thank goodness some of us had practiced long enough. Thank you, PH, for basically giving me my decades I practiced, but we fell back on what we understood with other coronaviruses and how to attack the new entry. With ASF, nobody has that. China didn't have it. And so we found out that feedstuffs was part of the transmission. So in a PRRS break today, and if it's a new break, if it's a naive herd, negative herd, we're swiffering the outside feed bins to just try to understand, was there virus coming in through the feed, or was there virus coming in some other way? So we do that detective work to try to figure this thing out. What about maternal transfer? We've touched on this. Some of the speakers have touched on this already. So now we're going to come back to this point a little later in this talk, but I'm talking about that pregnant sow in gestation. She may get exposed midterm. She may be exposed late term. How does that influence the piglets that are born in our ability to find virus or not? So processed fluids and things like that, we still have to understand a bit more. This is a key component when you're testing on PCR near weaned age pigs and you're wanting to go negative. And that's our goal. With any sow herd, it should be our goal that we should be able to wean PRRS negative pigs. Reed said it, Eduardo said it, several speakers have said that. That's our goal. How does this influence that? And is it maternal antibody, or is it a part of our internal biosecurity? And it doesn't matter to me if you home raise your gilts or if you purchase your gilts. What I'm going to elude and give you examples of the changes in the GDU is they can be applied to either. So as farms have gotten bigger, systems have gotten bigger, they raise their own gilts. So they'll have specific lines for that. Several clients continue to buy gilts. Over the last 20 years, this has been a fascinating, evolving change, and I'm not sure we're quite done yet, but it applies to small farms as well as large farms. If you're bringing your gilts in and you're only allowing 12 weeks, 3 months, to quarantine and acclimatize those gilts, my challenge to you is, how good are you doing? We have found, so back in the day, we had off-site finishers, most of them were contract finishers, that would raise our gilts for us. And then we'd bring them in as usually around 5 months of age. And in some cases, as the farms got bigger, and what I see around the world today is that we're putting them in several locations. So we've lost control over those replacement gilts. And the clients that I was dealing with, that was what they were telling me. So they wanted to bring that production in as close to the sow farm as they could. And that's where it's at today in the Midwest. And a lot of the new units or the recently units that have been built in the last 10 years, we have the GDU at the same site as the sows. Now that puts a lot of pressure on your biosecurity program. And I'll show you examples of that in just a minute. But how do you control a major pathogen like PRRS in a continuous flow building? That's still our challenge, and we don't always have those answers yet, but this is what we're doing. So let's talk about protecting that sow herd with the goal of weaning negative PRRS pigs. So we're talking about immune management of the replacement gilts. So you might ask the question, what's my goal for this program? And then how can I accomplish it? In other words, you're developing the protocols, the standard protocols that's going to be used by the employees, as well as how to monitor it. And we've talked a lot about the monitoring today. This slide illustrates the fact that if I have a low incident infection in replacement gilts, some are naive, possibly, some are negative, they're not viremic, but we have a couple there that are viremic. We put them into the sow farm. Well, we have the same situation there. And this can apply even to sow farms that are vaccinated and trying to eliminate or just control field virus. Well, these two pictures on the upper right of the screen illustrates the sow being viremic. So she got infected just prior to farrowing. She's passing virus on to her offspring. But what we know today, not all of the pigs are going to be infected at birth. I don't understand that as a practitioner, but that's what happens. Now, the second one is the sow that's no longer viremic, but a piglet is at birth. And of course, that moves right into the nursery and then the finishers, as Dr. Reed said. So 2 phases in our GDUs, quarantine and acclimatization. Nothing new. This first example, and I want to stress this, is a naive sow farm. Happened to be, in this case, a lot of them in my practice, we eliminated PRRS many years ago. Some of them are multipliers, some of them are not. This is how we elected to have the GDU attached to the sow farm. So we have this separate building, takes 200 pigs to 400 pigs, depending on the sow herd size. They're only going to be housed in this building roughly 3.5 weeks. We want to know that we know the source that they came from. They're monitoring monthly or more often than that. So we know that source. We know they're coming from a naive source, but did they pick it up in transit? And then we move them into the nursery. And in course, this case, we do not vaccinate. But then in 3 weeks, we're moving them into a gilt finishing barn, 170 days. We like to pull them into the sow barn where boar exposure starts for sexual maturity. Rarely did any of my clients have this situation and they used boars in the finisher. But there's limitations to this system. And the biggest limitation is not having enough space in that sow herd, in physical spaces, to bring a whole room of gilts in at one time. That seemed to work the best, both for training gilts into ESF systems and then also in how they accepted the crated systems. So we could crate break them, we could sexually mature them, everything inside that sow farm to maximize protection. This is the other type of system that came into play and is very common throughout the Midwest, where everything occurs in one building. So that room that's in red, this is during quarantine. We filled that usually with naive gilts. Now, the sow farm can be infected, but vaccinated in this case. So we need to get those gilts under the same immune status to going into the sow farm. So we bring them into this room, and think about the internal biosecurity with this. This room has to have a separate ventilation system, a separate pit. It has to have its own equipment. Everything has to be there in case we're bringing in a new virus. Most of these are going into filtered sow units, but not all of them. So during the quarantine, they're red. We're not taking any replacement gilts into the sow farm at 165 to 170 days of age because we're waiting until our testing comes back and we're totally sure that this room has the type of animals in it that we want. Once we know that through our testing, and we use both serum and oral fluids, both tests to find out if we have any virus in there, then we change the color, and those pigs are moved out of that room into one of the other nursery rooms and continue to be developed. That room is totally taken down, cleaned, disinfected, waiting for the next arrival of gilts. And so now we're taking the animals into the sow farm at this point, and usually, rarely do we do any boar exposure here in this GDU as well. We take them into the sow farm to do that. Once in a while, we'll have clients with boars out here, but not very often. This is another way of pictorially saying what I just did, where we come in, we vaccinate them after we find that they're negative. We vaccinate them first time, we give them a second mass vaccinate them, give them enough time. And that's the reason we've went into this kind of program, bringing replacement gilts, purchasing them, or bringing them in from our own nurseries at weaning. Because we wanted to lengthen out that time. That's our ally with so many aspects of immunology and acclimatization. So they're a stable population when they go into the sow farm. So to review, again, the gilts are entered into that room and vaccinated if they need to be vaccinated, like in example 2, and I give you those times. The boars, if they're in the GDU, they get vaccinated right along with the gilts. We don't forget about the boar population. We learned the hard way bringing in naive boars, and we were vaccinating, and they were just continuing to shed, just like we've seen with previous speakers. So the gilt sexual maturity also came into play. Another part of gilt performance in her lifetime that's starting to evolve with research in the last year in America is that her lifetime performance starts the day she's born. Think about that. We put so much importance on those replacement gilts to perform. Recently, I had the opportunity to look at some pig champ records, and everybody talks about sow mortality. We lose, not necessarily in mortality, but we lose a tremendous amount of replacement gilts in P0s before they ever farrow, after we bred them, and also in P1s. It is phenomenal information that we just now are starting to peel apart. That's a little separate. We do all the tests to make sure that the animals are not shedding virus if we're going to put them into the sow farm, so we can keep that sow farm totally from shedding, vertical transmission to the offspring. Back to maternal transfer. It's very, very expensive to do this. Daniel Harris gave me some really powerful information here recently on this very thing, and at last fall's Iowa State disease conference, John Harding from Western Canada, in his research shows that it's cluster-like in its transfer. So some of the pigs actually get infected, they die, so we have our classical stillborns and mummies. Other pigs may be born without virus, or at least we cannot detect it yet, or they're born with virus. Exciting research. Stay tuned. It's going to evolve, and hopefully it evolves very quickly. So you've all seen this kind of a picture where we color the facility so that we can train our employees about biosecurity. In this case, red is dirty, yellow is a transition, blue is good. Now, in different parts of the world, I got to use different colors. China, red is good. That's just part of their culture. So you learn that as you work with this in biosecurity. But this is all about the clean, dirty line. How well do your employees know the clean, dirty line? Well, we've all seen this too, where we establish a clean, dirty line. At this point, actually it starts at your fence, your gate. And then we get out of our vehicles today, we put on shoe covers, we step in disinfectant bats before we ever get to this part. So we've added layers since PED. So now we go through the shower, everything stays on one side of the shower, you go in and you use the farm clothes. Very standard, and it works. Think about what you're facing in other parts of the world. As you have gotten larger, you grew your sow farms. This happens to be a real farm in China, southern China, 10,000 sow farm. It is a multiplier farm. It's on a hilltop. So we have usually very cool weather. But they have, from November to my visit in March, developed a biosecurity program that's immensely intense. So it's prevention. They do not have ASF. They want to keep it out. So they built a building here as our first circle of defense. Now, this is all about external biosecurity. We haven't even gotten into internal biosecurity yet. So we take a shower, complete clothes change, then we walk to the next circle, do another complete shower, clothes change. These are farm clothes, boots and everything, and we go to the dormitory. So in China, their employees actually live in the farm. And these first 8 barns are the dormitory. This happens to be an exercise basketball court. So since November, they're disinfecting the basketball court. They're disinfecting these walkways all around this dormitory on a daily basis. They're using glutathione type disinfectants. They're using the lime back in the unit. They're trying to do everything they can. So I'm mixing a little bit of internal biosecurity in here as well. But think about this. If you're going to house your employees, you got to feed them. So they changed how the employees actually went back to the production side of the unit. And they would go back there and start work somewhere around 9:30, 10 o'clock, come back around 4 o'clock. They're still being fed 3 meals a day, but they're not having a break during the middle of the day. So they're thinking, okay, we're going to control traffic this way. So again, when you're doing biosecurity in a wartime situation, it's so far different than what we are doing with biosecurity here in North America. Think about where the kitchen's located. The kitchen right now is located in the dormitory area, but they want to put it to the outside fence. Because we talked about where are you getting your vegetables, where you get your supplies to feed these people. All the meat is coming from the farm, on site. It's fresh. So that was some of the steps that stretched me as a practitioner. I never thought about that before. But how do you put a clean, dirty line effect in to a kitchen flow? And it's on and on and on. But the take-home message is they're thinking through every aspect. So you've all heard about the feed and transmission of ASF with feed. They know that in the crop production areas of China, a lot of the farmers are drying the corn on the county roads. You've probably all seen pictures of that. I've seen it personally. Well, how do you buy that corn in a mill situation and disinfect it? They're cooking it. They know they're probably affecting vitamins and minerals, but they're cooking that again, trying to prevent ASF from getting in some of their farms. I participated in a workshop area, and one man actually spoke on 17,000 sows that went down. To date, nobody has repopulated successfully. So the take-home message is their producers, they are digging their heels in, they're applying the science as they learn it as fast as they can learn it, and they're going to survive one way or another. So let's tie this together a little bit. We've talked about resiliency of this virus, maternal transfer or internal biosecurity, and the clean, dirty line. You can't train and educate your employees enough on the clean, dirty line, in my opinion. And I'll show you an example of this in just a minute. This is a result of a multiplier farm. So that was negative for PRRS, naive for PRRS, when it broke. And so I was given the challenge in practice by the owner. I had one chance to eliminate this virus, or he'd find somebody that would. That's what he told me. So I said, okay, I'll design the program, but it's going to be costly because of this one opportunity. And he says, that's fine. We tested every litter. The farrowing people told me they wanted to process pigs at day 4 of age. I said, okay, we're going to collect daily samples from processed fluids. So what you see here is early in the break, and the CT values on the left-hand side, the time across the bottom, and as we went negative, we were getting negative results clear back early. So again, back to this maternal transfer that was going on. And even later in the testing, we still had samples with a lot of CT virus, a lot of virus. Don't quite understand that, but I'm going to get into the next part of the story. So as we proceeded down this line towards elimination, we then started near weaning serum collection. We had started in pH, we were doing strict McRebel, which means all 10 steps. Yeah, we've modified McRebel several different ways in America, but in this case, if she had 18 pigs, she farrowed 18 pigs, we never cross-fostered a pig. Amazing results come out of that to the point where they're cross-fostering far less. But we had to do something with those piglets that were not going to be good quality pigs at weaning. So we were euthanizing them. And I'll come back to that point in just a minute. So just to show you the example of working, this is the actual farm. The man standing in the hallway. The ladies were working the farrowing rooms and doing a fantastic job. We collected the testicles in a Ziploc bag and then the fluid from that. And again, that was on a daily basis. We were doing every litter. This is what happened that lengthened out our time to elimination. And I'm convinced this was not a maternal antibody transfer or maternal viral transfer. This was actually a mistake in our biosecurity. So during strict McRebel, as we call it, we have to euthanize pigs. We were down to the point where we knew where the last rooms were positive. We had 2 or 3 farrowing rooms still could possibly have virus from our testing. This was 3 weeks later. So the last test was the end of July that was positive, and then we were down to August the 21st having all negatives. That day, they euthanized some of these poor pigs. They actually threw them out the door down here. But the farrowing staff walked the virus into the farrowing rooms, 11 and 12, because we had a protocol malfunction. We didn't clean immediately after the euthanasia. So the body fluids were there from these positive pigs. And the reason I know this is because of communication with the staff and the manager afterwards. So 3 weeks later, we're finding positive virus in our near weaning age samples. And lo and behold, we move it into rooms 6 and 7 and then down in rooms 1 and 2 again. Just again, this internal biosecurity movement of people and equipment when you have a common hallway. We had strict protocols in place that anytime an animal was moved, anytime equipment was used, we were cleaning and disinfecting. And then at the end of the day, we disinfected the common hallway again. But we made that one mistake, and we lengthened out the time that it took us to eliminate PRRS in this situation. Simple little mistake. How often does that happen? So, kind of to summarize, horizontal, vertical transmission of not only PRRS, but all kinds of pathogens are important to understand. Because now, if we understand transmission, then we can put hurdles in place to stop it. Develop that immune management program, especially in your replacement gilts. So often I see the replacement gilts influencing the sow farm for whatever pathogen that you want. Stable with PRRS means that there is no shedding from the sow herd to the nursery or to their offspring. So we're not influencing the nursery, we're not influencing the grow-finish flow thereafter. Monitor, use the new tools. These researchers, and Daniel's going to be able to provide even more insight into this. It's phenomenal where we're going diagnostically. Evaluate that clean, dirty line and continue to have updates with your employees, what it means, why is it important, things like that. With that, guys, I want to thank you again for bringing this information, and I look forward to your questions.